Welcome back to No Permission Necessary. I am thrilled to be having one of my nearest and dearest on our podcast today to talk about her experience. So I'm going to give her the proper intro and read a little bit about her background and tell you a little bit about the relationship, and we'll get into it. Carrie Hunnicutt is a nationally recognized leader in behavioral health with over 20 years of experience driving organizational growth and innovation. Over the course of her career, she has led major expansions, launched nationally recognized treatment brands, successfully integrated departments following acquisitions, and built high performing teams across multiple states. Known for turning vision into results, Carrie's leadership approach blends data driven decision making with a deep commitment to the human side of care and a respect for the culture of behavioral health. She's also passionate about mentoring women, helping them lead with confidence while staying grounded in their values. I am so excited. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you,
Welcome.
Jill. Thank you, Molly. I'm so excited to be here with you both.
And, for our listeners, why this is near and dear to me is that Carrie is my mentor, and we started our relationship in a mentor mentee relationship many years ago, and since has evolved into a lovely friendship. So I'm just so excited to have another woman on our podcast that can share values, insight, takeaways. She's a mom, she's a leader, she's a brilliant woman. And so just super excited to have you here, Care.
Oh, thank you. It's quite an intro.
Well, you deserve it. So I don't know. I feel like for me, I'm sitting here thinking about, last night how this interview would shape, and I think it's going to happen organically. But why don't you just give us a little bit about, you know, your background, how
Sure.
you entered into the field, a little bit maybe about mentorship. We'd love to hear a little bit about kind of your early days.
Sure. Well, I started in the field, I guess like 25, well, over 25 years ago. And I had gotten my master's in counseling. And I actually went to the University of Arizona for my master's. And I became pretty like obsessed with working at Sierra Tucson back in the day. And so one of the restaurant that I was hostessing in, someone who would come in all the time was the clinical director there. So like I clearly stalked her and got a job in the alumni and discharge area. And so that really introduced me to more of the business end of it, which I really fell in love with. And I think I became early on, got really interested in really thinking about how people made their healthcare decisions.
Mm,
And that's where I came across my first mentor, and he was really the first person to see leadership potential in me. So that's really
amazing.
where, I kind of cut my teeth in behavioral health and really got introduced to the idea of having a strong mentor and somebody to really show me, kind of help me develop into the person that I wanted to be in this industry and foster my interest in the industry.
Yeah. What do you mean? You know, a lot of our listeners are, yes, people in behavioral health, some people outside of behavioral health, a lot of women who are, eager to develop in their leadership roles. When you say, how people made their healthcare decisions, can you elaborate a little bit more on like what you were drawn to in that aspect and what that means to you?
Yeah, I mean, it I can't explain it, and I almost can't. It's just I always found myself interested in the psychological space that people were in when they picked up their phone and called. Especially in those days, there wasn't as much people. There was no chat. There was, very little email in terms of how people reached out. But how when someone would pick up the phone and call, like, what psychological headspace are they in? And so there's the, you want to sell your program and have your program be somewhere that they choose, but there's also, are we the right program for them? And so I would always try to really just listen to their headspace, not in a sales way, but like, what is it that they need to hear? Like, what's, what are they connecting with to help them decide how to make the best decision for them?
Mm,
And so from like, I would almost say from the micro to the macro, and then, how does where the world is in an economic perspective, or even a political perspective, really influence how people are feeling, um, just psychologically about spending money, about
mm,
taking time off of work, like just anything that really factored into how people made their healthcare decisions. I found myself just really wondering a lot about. Uh, and again, there's two pieces to that. One is, just to make sure that I'm sensitive to the headspace that they're in. And then, if we were the right program for them, like helping them see that if it, again, if it was right for them.
Well,
yeah.
you mentioned a good point though, because I think leadership in behavioral health spaces really ties into that ethical piece and making the right decision. Because
Mhm.
when you're dealing with whether it's medical systems, behavioral health care systems, you're talking about a person's life, right? And you're
Mhm.
talking about these really difficult decisions that people have to make and accept, whether it's about themselves or their loved ones.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of the leadership in this space is when our program isn't the right one for them, right? And maybe there's a financial cost to that from the business side, but from the human side, that's not the right thing to do is sell our program as the right one. Can
that's
you
right.
talk a little bit about that and how that, like the ethical piece of it and how that's driven because over 25 years, the industry has changed so much.
You know, I think that's the first time that Molly and I really connected was when I was giving a presentation at Silver Hill,
Mhm.
about the changes in the industry. And I think that this was probably about 12 years ago. Mal, does that sound
Yeah,
right?
probably about right. Yeah, 12 years
And,
ago.
you know, I would say in the early 2000s when I was out doing outreach or marketing, people greeted you like you were the queen. Like someone is coming to visit me from a treatment program. And, there really wasn't a lot of, per se, competition. And as the industry grew, certainly a lot of competition, came in. We can go into an entire podcast on, the shifts in the industry and access to healthcare and private equity coming into healthcare, and really it turning
Right.
into quite a business. Um, but I always was fortunate enough to work with programs that I felt were really completely ethical, and really were much more about development of a solid program. And I believe it's like a circle. Like we get to market our programs because we have a quality product, and you have to have a business in order to be able to market those programs. So like it's like a yin and a yang to me. So if you invest in having a strong program and trying to have the right people, access your care, I won't say everything else takes care of itself, but that's just a key fundamental piece of, um, really that's where it all begins, is having a strong quality program and really saying to people, if we are the right place for you, then we'd love to be able to serve you. And if not, then let me help you get to where you need to be.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that such a crucial time in my career and what a full circle. I remember that presentation vividly, right? And I was very early on in my career. I was just starting to kind of straddle two roles where I was doing a little bit of marketing and I was still, I think, operating as a tech part time at the facility that I was working for in Fairfield County. And my boss said, "You need to go to this marketing event and like introduce yourself," right? I was petrified. And people who know me today are, I think, a little confused about how this all came to be. Like, the energy that you feel now is not the energy that I had 12 years ago, and Carrie can attest to that, right? So, I remember watching this panel and seeing Carrie up there, and this isn't to glorify, but really to highlight that her energy and her presence, like, she was rooted in her values. You were rooted in your values. You were rooted in your mission, in your position, and there was something that was almost, like, energetic about that, that I was like, I need to figure out how this woman has all these, all this knowledge, right? And being hungry and being eager to learn. And I think that mentorship, and why it was so crucial for me in my role, was that I didn't really have that from a boss. And you have to remember, when you're looking for a mentor or you're trying to learn in an industry that you're really passionate about, your boss has a bottom line that they're
Yeah.
expecting you to follow. And so they're always going to be a little bit skewed on the business side, where if you have someone outside of your organization, they're looking at it objectively. And so obviously I didn't kind of put all those pieces together in the moment, but I vividly remember after that talk and hearing the values, the ethics
Yep.
rooted in strong belief system to help your clients and patients, that I needed to understand how this all worked.
Yeah.
So maybe you can share a little bit about how that, not necessarily from that time, but like leading up to that time, how did you get there? How did you learn how to operate within your compass?
I mean, I really think it goes back to that first mentor that I had. He was just very influential to me at that point in time. I mean, it still is, but we don't talk that often, but he was just, I really modeled myself after him and almost like drank in his words on how we want to be. And he really helped me build a foundation of really, again, who I wanted to be in this industry. He always spoke about coming from abundance,
Mm.
and that's
I
something
love
that
that.
always stuck with me. And he always really made sure that we understood that this was a business. And kind of going back to what I said before, if we have a strong business, then we can afford to take care of our staff, to take care of the patients in the way that we want to take care of not needing to slide down in who we accept into treatment in order to put a head on a bed, so to speak. And he just really set the bar very high. And one of the things that he offered to me when he went and took another position within this organization was an opportunity to kind of co-lead the department while they were looking for somebody full time. And so that really gave me an opportunity to get a taste of what leadership looked like on an organizational level. And I think that also, I mean, that's actually several years before it all blends in, like now that it's like 15 years ago or more. But that actually kind of blends into the time where I started thinking about getting out there and presenting, sharing what I knew about the industry. I could tell, at that point in time, Molly, when we met each other, that we were at one of the first of several, I would say, big shifts in the industry. And um, there were a lot of new people entering into the industry at that point in time. Like I remember again, like 20 years ago, there was maybe like 6 or 7 of us that did this, literally, like, and we all knew each other. But there were literally like 6 or 7 of us that did this in the Connecticut and New York area. And, I think by the time that you and I met and I had started doing some leadership, positions in professionally at my work and started doing some presentations and seeing that the industry was shifting and changing. I would think there was probably like 40, 50, 60 people
Oh,
at that
yeah.
meeting.
I was thinking that. I was like,
Now
how many
there's
people? There were probably about 50 people at that event.
And now there's literally, hundreds, if not thousands,
Mhm.
doing what we do.
What would you say to somebody coming into the field now, into one of those roles?
Definitely get a mentor. But, you know, I would say, especially if you want to grow in this field and develop, that really thinking about it in terms of grasping opportunity and building skill. I think there's so many positions in competitive organizations now where they will dangle really high salaries and almost unreasonable expectations of people who really are even just starting out in this industry. And so they're lured by really, again, nice base salaries and potential to bonuses. But I think if you and it kind of fosters people having this kind of perspective of I want to get a promotion or I deserve to do this because I did that. And I think that that's really the wrong angle to come at it from. I think that people really need to look at it from the perspective of building skill. If you can approach it from kind of the place of how can I prepare myself today for what comes tomorrow, and demonstrate the skills and demonstrate initiative, you will then be ready for the opportunity when it presents. Like, let your interest be known, be a driver in your growth, but present it in a way that also serves more than just yourself. And if you have someone strong and ethical as a mentor, then that would really help you too. So I definitely think it's about just really learning skills and competencies and taking
Mhm.
initiative, but really being careful not to be lured by unre- high salaries that oftentimes come with unreasonable expectations. Because I think we've all seen a lot of really good folks and even friends of ours kind of go through that churn of, every 9 months or a year, shifting jobs. And that's okay. I don't want to say that from a place of judgment, but a lot of times when I've, picked up the phone and said, "Hey, catch me up. What's going on?" They're like, it was just, they just expected too much. The organization wasn't ready for the growth that they were pushing to get out there through, putting people out there in the field. And, now and I found a great opportunity, great salary. And so people end up moving around a lot more. And I think if you stay put for a while, you're going to learn a lot.
I think that's so important because a lot of what I remember about my early days in behavioral health, obviously, well, not obviously, but I had climbed kind of the ranks where I had gotten exposure as a tech. And then, I love how you talk about like, I just needed an entry point and I was the alumni and discharge coordinator.
Yeah.
And I, started where I could cut my teeth, right? And a lot of that, I think, comes from this desire and passion to want to be in the space. And I think people are called to this space. They don't necessarily just show up in this space, right? For a lot of people, it's not just a job, right?
No.
It's a calling, it's a passion, it's, you know, an energetic connection, whatever you want to call it. And so as I climbed the ranks, I had this passion and connection to my program, right? And I think
Yeah.
when people are connected to their program in that way, it makes them flourish because they have seen the outcomes. They have touched, you know, the families that are struggling. They have connected with the clients on a level that you don't always have for certain individuals who are, working for programs kind of
Yeah.
nationwide. And so when I think about the skills and the technique and the competency, right? Jill and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and I'm sure she can weigh in that competencies and skills don't just happen because you have had a couple good relationships, right?
Yeah.
Skills and competency happen from learning the ins and outs of how to develop both at the business level and the client facing level. Because the reality of this role is that it is a meld of the two, right?
Yeah.
It is not just a sales role. If you would like a sales role, there are many things to do out in the world that are just sales and not necessarily partnered with a life.
Yep.
And Jill, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I feel like we've had a lot of conversations about that, dynamic and the challenges that people face.
So I think as a clinician, it's hard to enter the field. So when and understand the business side of it, I think when you graduate and you go in as an intern and, I entered into the field, working in state funded programs. Then I moved over into the private pay side. I would hear about the marketing aspect. I would hear about the business development. I didn't really get it. And a lot of therapists who are on the ground floor, providers, they're the ones doing the business, right? They're the ones providing the care.
Yeah.
There's sometimes a big disconnect in the business part of it
Right.
of what one arm is doing in the other. And the people and programs that do this the best, in my mind, from what I see, are the ones where the clinical is teaching the business development side and the business development side is teaching the clinical side, and they have a relationship together
That's
that
right.
works. Um, because what ends up happening and why I stand on my soapbox a lot in this field is because we are dealing with people. And at the end of the day, I have businesses, I have a bottom line. I want to be profitable so I can
That's right.
continue to pay staff and the bills and all of that. Sure. But I am not going to blur my ethical boundaries around what clients are appropriate or not appropriate, because once you start doing that, it's a slippery slope.
That's right.
It's a slippery slope into, your standards of care changing and the clinicians and providers getting really unhappy and really confused as to what's happening on the business end, and people start panicking. I mean, we've seen this so much in our industry. As a clinician, though, there is sometimes you're like, wait, people are getting paid to go and talk about our program. Like, it's a little bit of a, when you come from this, we talk about our code of ethics in school and I graduate with my degree and I just want to go help people. You don't consider the business side. I think I'm probably unique in that I fully represent as an entrepreneur. I opened a business. I have multiple
Yeah.
businesses. Like I can do the business side and I can see that part. Most clinicians can't though. That's
Mhm,
like a foreign language, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
But you have to have both. Um, so I do think that you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And with the industry changing, you have to have a business development presence. It's just how it is now.
It's funny that you say that. I think that there's a perception that this is about going at, I think it's shifted. I think that there's a lot more awareness from the, I'll call it clinical or program teams, that this isn't a cush job. But I think that there was a time where people saw it as, oh, they take people out to dinner and they get on planes and they travel, like a glamorous job. And I'm like, this is not that glamorous. This is a hard job. You you're meeting with therapists to and or physicians or any type of clinicians, programs, whoever, and really asking them to trust you with someone's life. Like, that's a big ask. It's not, would you like to try this skin cream? Love skin,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's very
The
different.
stakes are a little
And
higher here.
yeah, and so to get somebody to say, "Yes, I will, you've earned my trust. I will pick up the phone and call you, if I think that there's somebody who needs you." That takes a lot. And then there was this perception, I think, that if I just went and talked to Jill, Jill's going to send me 6 patients next week. Like, so and so doesn't know about you. Like, there's always going to be people that don't know about you. If there were people that did that, if everybody knew about everyone, there wouldn't be a need for this job. Okay. So, like, let's just realize that there's always going to be people that don't know about a certain treatment program or resource. But, a lot of, as I've grown in my career, I obviously look at a lot of data, and it's also something that I'm like slightly obsessed and fascinated with, is just numbers and KPIs and data and metrics, and again, what factors into how people make these healthcare decisions. There's the numbers and then there's the story. But one of the things I always look at is conversion rates. And so if you work for a program and you have, say, a 20% conversion rate, that means for every 20 people that came, to your program, there are 80 that called that did not. And for those other 80 people to call, people did some work to get them to trust them to pick up the phone. So the teams, or the advertising and marketing teams, are really looking to go out there and connect with a lot of people to inform them, A, of the program, but B, that they can be trusted. So for those 20 people to come to you, to your treatment program, a lot went into that.
Mhm.
What do you feel like when you think about, kind of the early days and scaling your career? You've worked for really large organizations and probably more so in the infancy stages. Your first job it has definitely grown as far as the organization that it is under now. Back in the day, it was
Yeah.
not, it was privately owned. But what do you feel like are some of the things that you have done in your leadership role that were worth kind of the personal toll? Because I think I'm hearing a lot of what you're sharing is that you there's this common misconception about this role that it's easy. It's, a lot of like jet setting and being in uncharted territories and hanging out with people and having, dining experiences. But people who sit in the role understand there's a toll. So, what are some of the tolls that you paid personally and that people may not know the sacrifices that came with building a career on this platform and in this type of space?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for my kids are older now. So, they're in their 20s, and so I do remember when they were younger. I would say now it feels almost typical to me to say I missed some games and some dance recitals. Like, there was a personal toll, like, in the family life,
Uh-huh.
but I also felt like it really I really was, like, a great model for particularly my daughter in terms
Mm.
of balancing, a career that, it has been so rewarding to me and I have so much gratitude for. Um, but I think as I grew, I think that there's loss. That with every stage of growth, there's really loss. And, I think of when I moved into a leadership role and how alone it can feel,
Mhm.
and, the mistakes that I made, the things that I had to unlearn. So I mean, again, there's so much there. I wouldn't even really know where to begin.
When you were talking about the loss and the loneliness in
Mhm.
leadership,
Mhm.
it really just that's why we started this podcast, and
Yeah.
that's what Molly and I have talked about for years, where when you're doing the right thing, sometimes it feels lonely. When you're the lone voice trying to shift cultures, it can be
Yep.
lonely. I think as a woman in leadership, it can be lonely. Think a lot of things have changed, but I also think it's still a male dominated space in leadership roles and what that looks like,
Yeah.
and how we're perceived in leadership as females. So, speaking of nice versus not nice, do you have anything to say
Mm.
about maybe how you were perceived in that leadership role? I know I have many examples of something I may do and something a colleague might do will be perceived much differently, but it's the same behavior.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that perceptions of me vary. I think it's fair and valid. Um, in terms of what I would say is not my strongest way of being perceived. I've been told that my tone can be harsh sometimes and that I can be
Same girl.
intimidating. And, like, to be honest, when I'm not at my best, I can show up, like, in harder than I intend to, like, because that
Mhm.
then I think about where it comes from. It's like I'm frustrated, so I pull into like rigidity. I pull into restriction. Um, and people have told me that I'm intimidating, which I'm like, that to me, like, I don't want to invalidate anyone's perception, but like, I feel like I can't, like, something about that does not compute because I guess it's about me. And then I think, other times I've been told, that I'm a really strong and fair leader. Um, I don't think that people would say that they don't know where I stand. I think that people would say that I am really direct and I treat people fairly. And sometimes someone does not like a decision that's made, but that does not necessarily mean that they were treated unfairly. Um,
Totally.
so, and it's interesting because some folks on teams they have a joke name for me. They call me Nostradamus, which I think is hilarious. And I'm like, why? I don't understand why you're calling me that. And they're like, because everything that you tell us is going to happen happens.
Mhm.
And in retrospect, we should have listened to you the first time. And I have no skin in the game about being right. As a matter of fact, I love to be wrong because it also gives an opportunity for us to show how to be resilient and how to be honest about failure. But so I think that sometimes people's perceptions of you, change over time too. Like
Mhm.
they might about like, something I said or did or decisions that were made that I was, had to stand in front of and say this is a direction that we're going in. Here's what you're probably going to see. Here's what we probably need to be careful about or watch out for. And, people don't like change sometimes, and that's okay. But,
I
I
think that
think in
goes back
retrospect,
to
they're
I,
like,
I
we should have listened to you.
yeah, and I think that goes back to clear is kind, right? So
Mhm.
even if they aren't, and I think that was something that
Yeah.
you really instilled in me, Carrie, through all the changes that took place in my career and all the advancements and things that I wouldn't have been able to accomplish without a mentor.
Yeah.
And so if I was clear in my values and clear in my where I stood, then I could be clear with my team. And then therefore, even if they
Definitely.
don't agree, that doesn't mean that I don't say it, right? So I
That's right.
think there's this ability when you have clarity in where things are going. And granted, I have fallen short, of course, and I've come from a
Mhm.
place of feeling fearful and don't want to be transparent because I'm scared of whatever's on the other side of that and kind of
Of course.
grapple with those moments. But I will say that somebody can disagree and feel like they don't want that shift to happen, but as long as I'm making sure that I'm leaning into the transparent, language with them, then it's up to them to kind of get caught up to speed, right? And I think a lot of this
Yeah.
and we talked a lot about that through different transitions, right? Especially when it comes to acquisitions, because you are having to keep the trust of your team, but also try to encourage like a smooth transition, and straddling both spaces is really, really hard because
Yeah.
you feel like there's emotions involved, right? And I think people don't, I think people sometimes look at people who are in leadership roles and especially women and feel like we're not emotional or we're too direct or we should be a little bit softer, all the things that you said, or we're intimidating, right? But I like how Jill talked about that too earlier on, that, side by side, you probably wouldn't say that about a man who was, that would just be the expectation, right? So level setting there,
Yeah.
I think, is important.
Yeah, I agree. And as somebody develops as a leader, especially if they grow within the organ, like it is not hired in, but grow within the organization that
Mhm.
they're in. I think that they often begin by thinking that they have an opportunity to become the voice of the team then, and they are supervising their peers. They and someone has said to me, I got stuck in a real people pleasing kind of almost vortex and not knowing how to have those difficult conversations. So their new leaders are constantly pulled in 100 different directions. And if they're not able to be, like you're saying, upfront about where you're leading the team, and they'll drift. The team will end up
Yeah.
really leading you. One subtle acting out team member can really toxify the rest. So I really work with new leaders or folks that I'm developing or mentoring to, ask questions, learn what's going on underneath it, like nip it in the
Nip it
bud,
in the bud.
but
Mhm.
give it time to be heard, see if the behavior changes. But really, teach someone how to have, those hard conversations.
Yeah, it's funny because I just had this week a conversation about that with a new leader in one of our programs, and I said, "Listen, they had made a comment about being a peer. Will they still
Mhm.
see me as a peer?" I said, "Well, when you start, making some decisions, you're no longer going to be seen as a peer. Very quickly they're going to see you as somebody above them." And so there's two things that can be true.
Yep.
We can all have fun and joke around and we could be friendly and everything could be a kumbaya in the space that we're working in. And I can hold you accountable to your work.
That's right.
Because the
But that
moment
scares
that
people. That scares people.
and that was part of the conversation because
Yeah.
if we don't hold people accountable, not the first time, the second time, I'm sorry, but there's going to be people who give them an inch, they're going to take a mile, and now you're going to have to try to walk it back after giving them chance after chance and not addressing it. That's going to be a more
Yep.
uncomfortable conversation than in the beginning. Hey, these are the standards that we have. You're falling short of the standard. I'm just curious what's going on. Are you
Yep.
having a tough week? Like the questions you're saying, like ask the questions. What's behind the behavior? Because sometimes team members are scared to tell you, my mom's at home dying. I have a flat tire. I can't afford to fix. I mean, they have real stuff going on. And
That's right.
sometimes they're not telling you that. And so I think that's where you open up those lines of vulnerable communication around, okay, I can't solve all your life's problems. That's certainly not my role as a leader,
Yeah.
but I can maybe hold space for that. And maybe I do have some suggestions or who could help or how we
Yep.
can manage that better in the workspace. And sometimes that solution is it sounds like you need a break,
Yeah.
right? But we need to model those conversations for the new leaders coming on. But the people pleasing thing really, if that's not nipped up in the bud for the new leaders coming in,
Yeah.
you're gonna really struggle.
Yeah, you're right. And I think part of what you're talking about is creating kind of space for people to be honest about what's going on with them
Mhm,
without fear of really being judged or being almost punished for being like real and vulnerable for you with you. And some of the things that I've done with folks in that situation, are really sharing with them, and I could be a pretty boundaried person. Molly knows this. I probably lead with boundaries, like pretty, I don't know, a wall, I would say. So I do have to push myself there. But if I do and I, demonstrate some vulnerability to someone and show them that, I've been where you are, in some way, it's often a relief for them. And it's really like a guard down moment for them where they can connect on that experience. And, also, along the way, letting them know just how much I believe in them. Not just in like a "you're doing great" way, but like demonstrating for them that I believe in them and really wanna encourage their, risk taking, try new things, stretch into areas where, they're uncomfortable, but that I think they need to be pushed and that I think that they can tolerate the discomfort of it.
Mm, mm.
So like I won't coddle, I won't try to protect them, but really want to give an opportunity for them to own their own growth and build some self trust during those times of becoming, a leader.
mhm.
I think that that was so impactful when kind of part two to the story of asking Carrie to mentor me was, I don't really know what came over me because it was totally out of character. But Carrie had finished her presentation and I think I just because I had nothing to lose, right? I was like, maybe she says no, maybe she says yes, but I knew that I needed to learn in a way that I was not receiving at the time. And so the stars aligned and I went up to Carrie and said, do you think that we can have coffee? And her immediate response was, I'm not really in like a marketing role anymore. I'm in a leadership role because I think she was, at least my view was like that she was processing that I was looking to like develop like a B2B relationship with her. And I just doubled down and I was like, no, I need to learn from you. Like I need help, right? And and that's what started this relationship. And I might have even said the word mentor. I was like, I just need a mentor. I need help. I need
Yeah.
suggestions. What I'll say about that when you talk about boundaries is that that was really helpful for me because in the beginning, the relationship, I didn't need a friend. I needed someone to show me how to grow, right? I needed someone who was boundaried. I had a pretty easy time making friends my whole life, and, m- people gravitating to me gravitating to them. And I think this brings up a really crucial point in our behavioral health space is that I am here to do a job. I love that I have developed some beautiful relationships along the way, but I'm not here because I need a friend. I'm here because I want to learn and grow and develop relationships that can help more people and I can improve my skill set and my competency. And that's what Carrie did for me, right? And so it evolved into a friendship because it's been over a decade now, but the I just want to reiterate the importance of who you are keeping in your circle and for what purpose.
Yep.
Are they a mentor? Are they a boss? Are they a friend? Are they, like I think really drilling that out because that was that boundary that you had around I can be a mentor, you weren't leaning in like I can be your friend. That wasn't the purpose.
And then we
I don't
became
think
friends.
Yeah.
yeah. That's not just our industry though. I think in a lot of industries where you're at some social events, you're having coffee, having meals together, you're sharing space, you see each other maybe a few times a week depending on what, you know, even at work, right? Your colleagues.
Sure.
I, these people are not always your friends. You're in relationships with them, but they're not your that's a whole nother thing. But I think speaking of boundaries, right? It's like I can care a lot about people and support them and want the best for them, but they're also not my friend where I'm telling them everything that is going on with me. And I
Yeah.
think that that boundary gets so blurry in our space specifically, but even in like medical fields, because I've worked in hospitals and stuff before. I think because you're around people so long, especially 24-hour programs when you're like mandated and you're there, you're with each other so much. But because we're talking about these personal things all the time, you're like, oh, well, I can share this about myself. And it's like,
Mm.
I've learned the
You're
hard
like,
way of why we
whoa.
don't do that all the time. you
Yeah,
know?
what
Yeah.
I'd love to Carrie, are there like face down moments or moments where you feel like you really like are there tangible examples where you really grappled? You're like, "Ooh, I feel like I've made a wrong move there," or that I had like a face down moment or a moment in leadership where I feel like I could have done something differently.
Oh, I mean, 1,000 of them probably. I mean, you're bringing up a couple things that are coming up for me. Like what are some boundaries that I've
Mm,
first one is one of some boundaries I've developed. And I can think of two. Like one is not being accepting of other people's judgment.
yes.
And another one is not making decisions out of fear. And trust me, I've done
Mm.
both repetitively over years. It really is only the past several years that I could say that I do those much less.
Wait, what was the first one again? Can you run those
Not
2
being
back?
not being accepting of people's judgment.
Mm.
Just like no.
We're not accepting that anymore. We're not
No,
doing that.
we're not gonna do that,
Like,
or I'm
oh,
not gonna do that. You can go ahead and do it all day long if you want.
sounds like
Um,
your stuff, not mine.
Yeah.
yeah, and, like, what I learned, like, through one of my strong female mentors, like, actually the, person who I most recently worked for a couple of years ago, is that, like, leadership demands making hard, unpopular decisions, and what I have the agency over is the manner in which I execute it. Like, and that's what I just have. Like, there is zero chance, zero, that I'm going to please everybody. So it's actually quite freeing to be able to make the right decision. So people would learn, that I'm not going to waver on important decisions, but knowing that I didn't have to please everybody kind of takes the pressure off trying to do so. And then you can do what's right. And Molly, you asked about a face down moment. I think one of the biggest lessons of my professional life was, it's a long time ago now, like, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, maybe, I don't know. And someone that was a growing leader, I was supervising somebody who was a growing leader who had a team. And they said to me, I would like the opportunity to lead this team, this group of folks, a little more independently. Wanted some space from my involvement. And I'm like, I love ambition. I love seeing that. And so I was like, sure, have at it. And they had at it. They ended up leaving and taking 3 of the 4 people with them. And that was a huge mistake that I made, because the business suffered because of it. It
Mm.
did. And I was embarrassed in front of my colleagues, my leadership team. And because I realized I did not have to make myself smaller to make them bigger. Those things
That's a big
can
one.
coexist. I say nothing negative about this person. It is simply a situation where I need to own my failure. And subsequently, I did not seed relationships with people in my department and connection and figuring out what they need and what kept them connected to me or to the company. Um, and again, those things, the development of the person that actually supervises them can coexist with my involvement in their work relationship too.
Uh-huh.
Mm. It's such a good example. I mean, to not make yourself small to make someone else big, right? I mean, that's such a crucial lesson. I think that also as, you know, when you're really challenged with being able to connect with someone, I think that is an easy way, right? And I think this kind of goes back to the inception of the podcast. And Jill and I have talked a lot about that, where when you make yourself small to kind of prop somebody up. And the whole reason for this podcast and the whole reason we, titled it No Permission Necessary was because we stopped asking permission to make ourselves big, right? And in whatever capacity that means, like owning our personal
Sure.
life, our, financial life, our, work life, friendships, etc. And so when you went through that moment and I, was honored to be a part of that with you and hear your challenges and be able to watch you kind of work through it. Do you feel like you have resolve around it
Yeah.
now? And how long did that take? I think for a lot of people, they struggle to kind of still straddle that,
Well,
those challenges.
what challenges specifically do you mean?
Yeah, when
Like,
you have those face
work
down
way
moments to
back
not
from it?
kind of go
Yeah,
back there. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Not like, can I still connect to the feeling of it? Yes, but I just really tried to get into the place of, A, what do I need to do to fix it, this situation?
Mhm,
Like, how do I backfill it? How do I, like, just from the work perspective, be like, how do I make sure that this doesn't happen again? What have I
mhm,
learned from this?
mhm.
Um, and I think I do that pretty well. So I don't feel like it has a hold on me still, but I don't want to forget it.
Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
those failures are
Mhm.
the things that we learn from.
That's right.
Mhm.
And in terms of being vulnerable and, building up staff and different leaders, you have to use those examples of, "Oh, no, I didn't get it right all the time." Like, this is I had to Molly always uses the term "skin my knees." I had to make mistakes and learn from these
Mhm.
failures because I got the warnings from
Yep.
supervisors, mentors. They told me, "Oh, well, watch out for this," or, it's not until you do it, it'll be different for me. And I don't know if some of that is an alcoholic's way of thinking of like, "Oh, it'll be different for me." But I do think that
Yes, the answer is yes on that. The answer is
we
yes
think
on
we
that.
have we have a better answer,
How about
right?
that?
So I'm gonna wait until I make the mistake myself, but that's what sticks with me. I mean, those are the things I've been here before. Now, I'm not willing to go through the emotional pain or the
Mhm.
embarrassment or the shit,
Mhm.
whatever the emotion is
Mhm.
behind it. I'm not willing to do that, so I'm gonna do it differently, even though I don't really want to do it that way either.
Yeah.
Mhm. There's so much to unpack there. I would say that, you know, kind of jumping around here, but, I think it's an important piece is through your, and we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, that there were challenges where you might have felt like you should have been somewhere for your children and that some moments were harder than others. And I think that
Yeah.
goes back to Jill and I talking about that work-life balance is kind of bullshit.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Oh
At
yeah.
every turn, your energy is, more towards one area than the other. So instead of looking at, the things that were missed, and I think you're a really great person to share on this, is how did motherhood change your approach to leadership?
Yeah.
How did it create more abundance, as you would say, rather than less?
Yeah. Well, first I'm gonna you said the word balance, and that's kind of like a trigger word, right? For with that in the way you're talking about it, like what is it? I'm going to introduce the word equilibrium to you because
Mm,
I believe that there's people think that equilibrium is balance, but equilibrium is more about movement and competing forces, and it's much more fluid, I believe. And that's kind of how every time I've talked about balance to myself, I've replaced that word. And it might not be the official definition of it, but to me, it fits. Um, and with motherhood, I think I was a mother before I saw myself as a leader. Again, I think my kids are older. But so what I would say is that motherhood really informs my approach to leadership. My job is to help somebody, if I'm mentoring them or if I'm their supervisor or if I am their mother, become to be realized as the person that they want to be.
mm,
Guiding them, really about guiding someone's development. You know, whether you're working with someone who's a growing leader, or someone who's a mentee, or your children, they aspire to have more responsibility, more visibility. They make decisions that feel heavy as they grow. Insecurity is stirred up. I think the questions from them are like, am I ready for this? Like, kids might not have the words to articulate that.
mhm,
They instead, run into things, but I mean, really, that's how they learn. Am I ready for this? I can think of someone that I provided some coaching and mentorship to, and, we would talk a lot about how to lead in a room with people that had bigger titles, how to get
mhm,
her voice heard, how to balance really vision with like the framework and steps to deliver the vision. Really learning that and then letting them know, just like I would with my kids, like, I believe in you, even when you can't quite see yourself
mhm,
there yet, wherever the there is. So I think there's a huge parallel with parenthood, or motherhood and leadership. It's like, I believe in you. Like, how powerful are those words? And, even with I think of my daughter, or even my son, and people that I might mentor or lead, letting them know that, like, they're really not to become a copy of me, a carbon copy of me, even if it feels safe and they might admire something about me, that they need to grow into their own person, their own leadership, have their own style, their own voice. Like, our children and who we supervise are not extensions of us, and it is our job and our responsibility to help them become the person that they want to be.
I admire that about you. I admire that about Jill. My children are obviously still very small, and sometimes it's hard to wrap my head around being able to loosen the reins in that way, but I've been able to watch other women who've done that. And I think that, going back to what you said about showing your daughter what it looks like to be a working mom, a mom in leadership, a trusted confidant, right? Like all of those, it's almost like your world doesn't have to be separated. Like I love how that equilibrium analogy, because it's almost as though it all fits together. There's no When you're aligned with your passion, you're aligned with your purpose, you're aligned
Mhm.
with your employment, you're aligned with your qualities in motherhood, it's almost as though you never have to look at it so compartmentalized. I think that
Yeah.
really just struck me in a big way. I think it was, definitely an important something that I'm gonna be taking away for sure.
Speaking of takeaways, do we wanna talk about the way we usually end a show? I don't know if you gave Carrie a heads up on that.
I didn't, I totally forgot.
Uh-oh.
So at the end of every episode, we do a permission slip. And so when we have a guest on, we have, the guest do the permission slip. And it's just for everybody listening or watching, what is something that you would give them as a permission slip in their life?
Give yourself permission to not expect perfection.
Mm,
Um, I think striving for balance or striving for perfection leads to like really rigid, fear-based decision making. And if you expect perfection and you're afraid to make the wrong choice, you'll avoid risk. And that means you won't have access to things that will enrich your life or enrich an outcome. I think of folks that I work with now, and most people who've worked with me have heard me say, like, we're going to nail it 80% of the time. Of the
mm,
20% that we don't, we will probably tackle another 10%, like that 10%, and it'll be really great. But 10% will probably never fix it. So I think if we expectation set, but not
mhm.
expect perfection, that's that's a good thing. Like, I get strangely excited when I can say to people, like, "We got this wrong." Like, I can fall
Yeah.
on the sword so fast and with, like, such a big old smile on my face. But it sets the stage to be accepting of risk, to be accepting of failure. It models how to try to fix something. And typically when you do, you have increased confidence that this time you've got it right. So I guess I would say, give people permission to, not expect perfection.
I love that one.
I should feel like I feel like I should know that, you know?
Molly needs that one pretty often.
I
It
mean, that 80/20 rule, I mean, amazing. I know you've told me that, but again, some really good nuggets today that I really, really needed to hear, and evidence that, I need to continue to be learning and open and remind myself I can't be the teacher and the student simultaneously. I think I need to, sometimes I'm the teacher and sometimes I'm the student. And what does that look like? What does that equilibrium look like? I'm removing the word balance effective today. So,
effective immediately.
effective
Effective immediately.
immediately. I want to ask one last question before we wrap up, which is I think really, really, really crucial for people who are expecting to walk into a new space, behavioral health or not, and wanting to grow in their roles. What would you want the next generation of behavioral health leaders or otherwise, what would you want them to know?
I mean, I feel like there's 2 pieces to this. One is, like, much more almost, like, more tactical. It goes back to something that Jill said, about it's gonna be different for me.
Mm,
And I think that coming leaders coming into this field have to realize that you can't take a model from another industry and lay it over behavioral health and think that it will deliver. Um, and I want to be really clear. I am not being critical of other industries. And it's not as though I think that people coming in from other industries cannot succeed. I do think they do. I've seen it. Uh, but it coming in with you have to come in with curiosity and with a lack of arrogance. And, I've been guilty myself of being over impressed with people coming in from different industries and laying a model over behavioral health. And, I would think, oh, I can learn. I'm going to ignore my gut that's telling me what they're doing might not work because I should be able to learn from them. And yes, I should be able to learn, but I should also be able to trust my gut. And that's something that
mm,
I've learned. So I think that that's really a tactical one. And then for someone coming into this industry, whether you're developing as a formal leader or not, it's don't be afraid of change. Um,
mm,
you can mourn loss and things that when you're moving somewhere else that you leave behind, but develop resilience and excitement for change. And if you are a leader, become an expert in change management. Um, that's what I would. That's the advice I would. I guess it's not the word advice. You didn't use advice, but what I share with
yeah,
them.
what would you would share? Yeah. I mean, be an expert in change. Really impactful today. I'm so glad you came on.
I
Thank
am
you,
too.
Carrie.
This was
Thank you
great.
for your
Thanks,
insight.
Jill.
Yeah.
Thanks, Molly.
Yeah. Appreciate you.
You too.
Bye.